10 years ago, the top 5 hanging nations in the world were China, Nigeria, Iran, the United States, and, of course, South Africa. By the end of 1989, when a moratorium was placed on the death penalty in South Africa, over 2,500 people had been hanged in this country. The Truth Commission now has to investigate whether or not the death penalty constituted a gross human rights violation.
I was nearly hanged for something I didn't do. I didn't know anything about it. I asked myself that how many people who have been hanged who are innocent. Even today, I'm not able to believe that I was in death row.
Duma Khumalo was granted a stay of execution 24 hours before he was to be hanged.
95% of the people who were sentenced to death in this country were black, and 100% of the people who sentenced them to death were white. You were much more likely to receive a death sentence if your victim was white.
ANC activist and lawyer Paula McBride knew and worked with numerous prisoners who died on death row.
Maak nie saak of dit wit of swart was nie. As jy instap daar bo by daai gelkamer, dan is dit absoluut professioneel. Daar dink jy nie meer aan wit en jy dink nie meer aan swart nie. Ou kan in 'n mate sê dit was heilig. Jy het respek gehad vir daai plek.
Warrant officer Johan Steinberg escorted condemned prisoners to their death for over 2 years. On Tuesday, Khumalo, McBride and Steinberg gave the Truth and Reconciliation Commission a realistic account of life and death behind these walls at Pretoria Maximum Security Prison. In her submission to the TRC, McBride says the Pretoria Maximum Security Prison was a prison designed for death. Its sole purpose was to imprison persons condemned to death, clothe them, feed them, and keep them whole until they were killed. She also urged the TRC to investigate the racist manner in which the death penalty had been imposed.
Some judges in the 60s and 70s boasted about the fact that they had sentenced X number of men to death for the rape of white women, which was considered the most heinous crime ever. But for the rape or murder of black women, there was one judge who boasted he had never sentenced anybody to death for that.
Khumalo and his co-accused, known as the Sharpeville Six, were sentenced to death for murder, subversion and public violence in 1985. He's still battling to come to terms with what he calls the unique horror of having to contemplate one's final moments on the gallows.
They were strong men, but at night people would cry. When you asked him why were you crying, he said, I was dreaming on my way to the death row.
The prison drama Vyfster was the first locally produced TV series to give South African viewers a glimpse of what went on behind the walls of a maximum security prison. 20-year-old Johan Steinberg had just started his career as a prison warder on death row when he appeared as an extra in the popular TV series nearly a decade ago. It was a more mature Steinberg who appeared before the TRC this week. This time, he is no extra. He's the first death row prison warder to speak out. Steinberg joined the Department of Correctional Services to learn a trade and further his rugby career. 3 days after he started working in the prison service, he was sent to work in the Pot, a special section inside the prison where condemned prisoners spent their last 7 days of their lives. That day, he witnessed his first execution, 7 men hanging, an experience which still haunts him.
So, 10 voor 7 se kant, 10 voor 7 se kant, het ons met hulle uitbeweeg in die gang af. Het was absoluut doodse stilte geweest, net hulle het nog gesing en gebid en hulle mense gegroet, met vriende gegroet. Dan het ons beweeg na die galgkamer toe, deur al die nodige hekke, tot ons bo by die eerste ontvangslokaal was, voor jy na die galgkamer toe gaan. Daar is hulle staan gemaak teen 'n muur met hulle gesigte na ons toe. Dan het die laksman gekom en vir hulle gevra of hulle enige versoeke het of last wishes. En dan het van hulle vir ons bedank vir die tydperk wat daar was. Baie van hulle het vir ons sê God bless us. Dan het ons, wanneer die hele storie klaar is, dan het ons vir hulle missies opgesit.
Steinberg described in chilling detail how a noose would then be tied around each man's neck. The prisoner would be made to stand on a trap door. It would give way when the hangman pulled this lever. The men would fall, their spines would rupture, they would lose control over their bowels, and Steinberg and his colleagues, who were sworn to secrecy, then had to clean the dead bodies.
I can't force you to say things that you'd rather not talk about. But we would be the poorer if you were not able to tell us in a much more detail the things that affected you.
Dit is of iets in jou lewe mis wat jy na gejaag het. Jy het dit probeer stilmaak met drank. Jy het dit probeer stilmaak met aggressiwiteit. Dit is baie moeilik om oor te praat.
The former death row warder still lives in Pretoria and works in the kitchen at Pretoria Maximum Prison. He maintains that he and his fellow warders were just doing their job on death row and should not be seen as inhumane or barbaric.
Kyk, daai tyd het jy dit nie opgemerk nie, want jy het gedink is normaal. Maar vandag as jy terug sit en jy kyk terug na die hele besigheid toe, dan kan jy sien jy was 'n ander mens gewees. Ja. Ou droog gemaak.
Hoe sal jy die verhouding tussen die ter dood veroordeelde gevangene en die bewaarde beskryf?
Almal was ons vriende gewees. Lid en gevangene verhouding. Daar is nie spesifieke gevalle nie. Jy kan nie toelaat dat jy emosioneel betrokke raak by enige persoon nie, want jy kan dit nie bekostig nie. Want dit kan veroorsaak dat jy nie later van tyd jou pligte kan uitvoer nie.
Johan, dink jy dat die doodstraf heringestel moet word?
Dit is my persoonlike gevoel. As hulle dit terugbring, bring dit terug in 'n ander vorm. Dis al wat ek sê.